Hello, Bob Van Rossum with Market Pro, and it's really interesting to see why senior level executive roles fail sometimes from an executive search perspective. And in our world, right, which is CMO executive search being about half of what we do, in other marketing positions that are senior level being the other half, it's sometimes easy to look out and say, hey, that didn't make any sense from the beginning. But ultimately, I just recently spoke to a good friend of mine, and I've known him since 1998, 1999, that time frame. And he's really grown his career as our search firm has evolved to becoming kind of the premier marketing-specific executive search firm in the country. And he's now on his third CMO gig in, not a search we were working, but something where he reached out to us and said, hey, I've got some questions, like how do I manage through this process? What do you recommend as someone who's an expert in the space? And so the search was really set up to fail from the beginning by the organization that's recruiting for a chief marketing officer. And so what does that mean? Why was it set up to fail? Well, it's about a $6 billion company. They're recruiting for a chief marketing officer, and the expectation is that person will relocate to their to the city that they work out of, right, where their corporate headquarters is, which we're seeing more and more, right, as it's 2025 and organizations are seeing what works and what doesn't work with remote or hybrid work. More and more corporations are going back to the office, and relocation is again becoming a bigger part of what we do as a marketing executive search firm. So about a $6 billion company, and they're going to market with a CMO search. And the recruiter that they chose was not an executive search firm. It is a staffing firm that is a very good, big, large national staffing firm that's typically going to place people on a contract basis through staff augmentation for IT mainly, but really any part of the organization that needs a staffing service, which is typically, coordinator, manager, senior manager level talent. And we need them to come in on an interim basis to fill in, is what this company does, and they're very good at it. But then if you go to their website, they also say they do executive recruiting, right? And the fact that they call it executive recruiting is the first red flag that it's not really an executive search firm. And they generally are going to ask the same questions or same number and level of questions that they ask for staffing that they do for executive search. So what does all that mean, right? They found this individual, who's my friend, who is absolutely an A player and absolutely would have been a huge win for them to have on their team. And I said, so first, what kind of interview questions did they ask you relative to marketing strategy, digital, return on advertising spend? And he said, well, they really didn't, because that's not their expertise and they didn't know. And so I said, okay, well, what kind of questions did they ask around leadership and culture fit? And he said, not really any, basically. So, they asked about 3 interview questions total for a chief marketing officer search for a $6 billion enterprise. So right there's no way to know, right, if the talent that they're presenting to their client is a good fit for the opportunity. Now, in this case with my friend, they got lucky because he's absolutely a rock star CMO who would have been a huge value add for the organization. But that wasn't because their process was proper. It was because they happened to find the right person who was open to interviewing. Now, unfortunately, based on where the offer came in, it was never someone that they were going to be able to hire. And so it was a huge waste of time for him. It was a huge waste of time for the HR team, the executive team, and everybody that interviewed him, because based on where the offer came in, he was never going to consider it. And that's another area where if they had hired an actual executive search firm who understood how to work with individuals at this level, it never would have gotten that far. All that time wouldn't have been wasted because we would have known that up front, right? And the comment he made as I was asking him questions around how the process went is he said the recruiter, meaning from the staffing firm, it was obvious they were way over their head and didn't understand how to work positions at this level, right? So what are some of the things that ultimately were missed, right? So the first thing we talked about, that was the interview process, and the depth of the interview process and the quality of the vetting of the candidates just wasn't there. There was maybe 3 interview questions asked total, which is kind of what we do in the world of staffing. And compared to our executive search process, which is, an hour-long deep dive interview on marketing with our own custom-based questions mixed in with some top grading questions, and then a second interview that is typically also about an hour, could be 45 minutes, depending on how the conversation goes, which is now focused on culture fit and leadership. So we're interviewing candidates before we ever send them to our client for, an hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours, and ruling out 85% of the candidates that we interview and only sending the top 15%. So completely different process than 3 quick questions, and if we think you're good, we're full, we move on. So that was kind of step 1 that was a miss, and one of the reasons why this search process has failed. Number 2 was, at the end of the process, this person's gone on site to interview. They've interviewed with, peers at the C-suite level, the CEO, the chairman of the board of directors, and they're really excited about making an offer. And then the offer comes from a senior manager in HR, and that senior manager in HR has not previously had any communication with this individual around compensation. And the offer itself comes in at a level that is just something that this candidate's not going to consider, right? So the base salary was okay, probably 10% light of where it needed to be for this individual to consider it. The bonus was fine. It was between 35 and 40% short-term incentive target bonus, but there's basically no long-term incentive. And he's coming out of a role where he has significant long-term incentive. So not only would there have needed to have been long-term incentive or a way to offset the fact that he wasn't going to get long-term incentive, so the base would have needed to have been significantly higher, or the bonus would have needed to be significantly higher. But there also wasn't any provision in there to help offset the fact of the amount of, unvested long-term incentive he had with his current employer. So they're short over 150, somewhere between 150 and you could argue $500,000 a year on long-term incentive compensation, depending on how you look at it and measure it. But they're at 0, and he's obviously not going to consider that. He's walking away from a large amount of unvested, and there was nothing in there to offset that from a signing bonus perspective. It wasn't even really discussed with him as how that would happen, right, or what we would do to offset that. And so those were both big misses. And then the other piece that was just completely off, right, was the relocation package. So we are seeing more and more organizations get back to wanting to relocate people to their office, and that's changing and shifting back to what we saw pre-COVID. But here was a very low fixed amount that was offered for moving of household goods. And that was it. And he was expected to be the one who found the estimates for what that was going to be, provide receipts, and figure out who was going to move that himself. So there was no relocation company that was supporting him in this process. There was no, anything in there that says, hey, it's going to cost you money, selling your house, right? As you go to sell the house you're in now, from a commission perspective, we're not offering to offset that. And then, we really want you to come here and hit the ground running, but we're expecting you to manage your own reload. So that's a big distraction that we're not going to take off your plate. But at the end of the day, right, it would have cost him money to come take the job. And nothing says like, hey, we're really excited about you as a C-suite level executive. We want you to come work for our company, and we expect you to pay out of pocket to be able to do so. So just a huge message to the candidate that we're not really excited or interested in you being a part of our team when the relocation package asks him to spend money coming out of pocket. He has LTI, which he's communicated in the process to the staffing firm that was trying to do executive search, and not understanding what that meant. And, we're short not significantly short base, but we are short on base. So that means as a percentage, we're short on bonus. And the whole thing was a miss. I mean, there's basically, he's not going to take the role based on the relocation package. He's not going to take the role based on the lack of long-term incentive. All of those are deal killers. And there's also no employment agreement at the C-suite level. It was an at-will situation, which at his last 3 companies, he's had an employment agreement with severance that was outlined if something had changed. So all of those were things that would have prevented him from taking the opportunity. So then you kind of have to ask, all right, this was never going to be a fit. And why did we even let it get to this point? Why did we send this person in to interview? Why did we take his time, CEO's time, chairman of the board's time, other C-suite executives' time to interview someone and go through the entire process when it wasn't going to work? And at the end of the day, the reason is simple. We trusted a very good staffing firm to do something that wasn't their expertise in recruiting for a chief marketing officer. And maybe that was because they've done a good job as a staffing firm. Maybe that was because they offered to do it for less money than a true real executive search firm would have. But the true real executive search firm would have understood the time necessary to be successful. But none of it matters, right? Because they didn't really save money by not using an actual executive search firm. They've cost themselves a lot of money by this position being open for this long. And the opportunity cost of what has come to the business is significant. And now, however many months later that they've been going through this process, they're no closer to solving it than they were in the beginning because their lead candidate has just said, no, thank you. And so what happens too often is, we try to take someone who's been successful for us in a staffing capacity and brought in really good people for our IT department that are junior level and in getting work done, or other areas of organization, but they've done a great job as a staffing company. And now we're going to expect them to go recruit a chief marketing officer and understand that somehow we think we're setting them up to be successful, but at the end of the day, nobody wins. The staffing firm looks bad because the person that they brought in said no. The HR person looks bad because they've extended an offer themselves, not the executive search partner doing that for them as far as the initial offer, which is the way it should go. And the candidate turns it down. And then the CEO is going to be very unhappy that the top candidate didn't take the job, but the top candidate was never going to consider the job based on the offer that was put forth. And that should have been figured out much sooner in the process. So while they thought they were maybe saving money by going with a service or a process that was different than what a true executive search partner would have been able to bring to the table, the lack of experience and expertise in how to hire a chief marketing officer ended up meaning they just didn't hire anybody.